black people are not getting UV induced melanoma. This is a myth. So they're pushing to us that we need to work on our myths, but the reality is you're pushing the myth. You're pushing this myth that the sun is out there damaging black people, and the data doesn't support it. We've got a very clear report here proving that white people in Western Europe are 130 times more likely to develop any type of melanoma. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid. And the fact that you've got the media out there pushing out such a, I mean, there's lies and then there's just the opposite of the truth. Okay, we're recording. Welcome to the King's Monologue, and possibly one of the most important videos that perhaps I've ever done. Now, it's going to seem a bit bizarre, me doing this video, because in many ways it's outside of the remit of the normal subjects that I tackle, being obviously history, anthropology. But in the end, I kind of felt a obligation to tackle this subject because, to be quite frank, there's so much misinformation being put out about this subject and so few people that are showing a willingness to tackle it. There seems to also be a very active and deliberate suppression of information around this subject. Now, in many ways, we're going to see if that's true when I release this video, because if I release this video and it's very active suppression, deliberately hiding it from search results, then I guess my theory would have been proven. It's got me thinking that perhaps there's someone out there that doesn't want me tackling this subject. I've already tackled this subject on my other channel called The King Mono Show. If you haven't already subscribed to that channel, please subscribe to that channel, where I kind of tackle more fringe or side subjects, and it's more of an opinion-based channel. I actually wasn't going to bring this topic onto this channel. I was actually going to make this video for the second channel, but I've decided this topic is so important that I actually wanted to do it on my main channel. I wanted to reach as many of my 75,000 subscribers, and hopefully more, as possible, because this topic needs to be discussed. This subject needs to be broached. The lies and the misinformation need to be challenged, and basically the health and well-being of melanated communities, not just black people, but melanated communities worldwide, needs to be protected and visited in a much more stringent way. I've already created a medium length video. It's kind of like 10 minutes, so it's not the shortest video in the world, but if you check over at the King Mono Show, I've got a 10-minute video on the same subject. So if this one ends up being too long, I have no idea how long it's going to end up at this stage, but if this one ends up being too long, hop over and have a look at that video instead. But either which way, do not avoid tackling this subject. Do not avoid viewing this, because this might be some of the most important information that I share with you, and then you can share with your family, your loved ones, your children, etc., etc. One of the reasons that I feel like this subject is so important is because it tackles something that's, I guess, it's ancestral, in that in many ways we come from a past that has been littered with mistrust between the melanated community and the medical establishment, the pharmaceutical establishment, and I'm going to use the word white-owned, because actually when it comes to the medical field and the field of pharmaceuticals, there has been a very deliberate racial divide. There's been a divide in the kind of help that's administered. There's been a divide in the kind of treatments that are actually given, and there's been a divide in the kind of information and advice that we're given. I could give you an example of at a stage in time, my mum was suffering immensely. She had a really violent cough, and she went to visit her brother in Nigeria, who is a medical doctor, and he asked her what she was taking, what kind of drug she was taking, and basically she'd been given a drug to help with her blood pressure. So it was a blood pressure medication, and he told her, stop taking this immediately. And basically he said he's written to the NHS on multiple occasions warning them about this drug that they give specifically to Black and Afro-Caribbean patients, because he said it's like a death certificate. It kills them. If they take it for long enough, they suffer from respiratory diseases, and in the end, they essentially pass away. So my mum stopped taking that medication and immediately, Literally immediately the cough stopped and she was fine. But she had the benefit of having a brother in Nigeria who just happened to be a doctor. If she didn't have that, God knows what could have happened. And I only give you that as one of probably a plethora of examples that people probably have as to why in the melanated communities there's a huge and growing distrust, and in many ways it's earned. Are all situations as conspicuous and dark as that one? I would say absolutely not. But one thing I will say, when it comes to medicine and when it comes to the communication that we're given in the media and it comes to the entire medical field, there is a tendency to publicize and isolate any ailments that they find within other communities. So for instance, if I was to tell you, what are the things that black people suffer from? Everybody can answer those questions. They'd say things like, oh, sickle cell, oh, high rates of diabetes, oh, high blood pressure. Those are just kind of examples of things that we know specifically there are higher rates of in the black community. If I was to ask you exactly the same question, okay, well, what do white people suffer from? Most people would have no idea. When it comes to the ailments that exist specifically in the white community, there tends to be a generalization. So anything that white people suffer from at high rates, everybody suffers from at high rates. There's no isolation when it comes to their ailments. And that's where this topic comes in, because we're talking about melanoma here, something that white people, particularly Western Europeans, suffer from at astronomically higher rates than other people, and yet we are sold the idea that it's a problem for everyone and everyone needs to take it seriously and everyone needs to treat it with the same level of seriousness. And that's actually not true. There's very little evidence to suggest that, and actually all of the evidence we have suggests contrary to what we're being told in the media. And there seems to be a growing trend of this. I've been contacted by several people since I released my first video talking about the fact that there is a push, a massive push on social media, convincing melanated people, convincing black people, you suffer from skin cancer, you need SPF, you need this, you need that, we suffer from it worse than they do. And it's misinformation, and it's not the first time they've done this, it's total misinformation. Wait a minute, did I ask you to subscribe yet? Well, if not, please make sure you're subscribed. What are we doing here? It really helps the channel's growth. Please hit the subscribe button. I am trying to get to 100,000 followers, and as you can see, it's taken me a very, very long time. So hit the subscribe button. And now the first video that I wanted to react to was this really excellent video called "Sunscreen Probably Doesn't Stop Melanoma in Black People." Now this video was produced by a channel called Figure One. It's a couple years old, doesn't have many subscribers, and just to put this in context, this video has 600 views. It was released 2 years ago. I don't know if that's due to suppression or due to black people not being interested, but that's criminal. Every black person on the planet should have seen this video, and not because it gives us good advice, not just because I should say it gives us good advice about how to detect acral melanoma, but also puts into context our relationship, our very distant relationship with skin cancer as a whole, and actually really sums up many of the issues that I have with this entire campaign. So without any further ado, let's watch it together.
Cases of melanoma have been on the rise for a while now. In 1999, the number of new cases reported that year in the United States was just over 41,000. By 2019, it was over 88,000 cases. Similarly, in 1999, the age-adjusted incidence rate was 15 in 100,000 people. And by 2019, it was almost 23 in 100,000 people.
And in the next report that I'm going to show you, this is predicted to continue to rise. So in spite of their continual push of everyone using SPFs, the cases of melanoma continue to rise. So there is that too.
An increase of over 50%. Based on these numbers, it's no wonder why we're constantly being told by public health organizations and our doctors to wear sunscreen. But melanoma doesn't affect everybody equally. the color of your skin makes a big difference. When we look at melanoma incidence rates across racial and ethnic groups, white people of European descent, like me, are overwhelmingly those at risk of melanoma. In contrast, people of color have melanoma risk and incidence rates that are several times lower, with black people being almost 30 times less likely than white people to get it. This is because of melanin, a family of chemicals in your skin that gives you your skin color. People with darker skin have more melanin in their skin than those with lighter skin. Melanin acts as a physical barrier to UV light, causing UV rays to scatter, preventing it from penetrating into the deeper skin tissues.
Now, this is where I have a slight difference, because I believe what we're being told about melanin on the whole is a bit false. And I'm not criticizing this video, by the way. This is a really excellent video. But the whole idea that the sun is this malignant force that is out there to damage and destroy us is a narrative that I do not inherit. Melanin doesn't protect us. It allows us to cohabit with the sun. And there's two different kind of streams of language being used there, but I think it's really important that we stop this whole dialogue of sun protection and sun damage and UV damage. These are terms that were created by people who are melanin deficient, because that's what the sun does to them. And our melanin doesn't prevent us from the sun, it allows us to optimize the sun. So it's just a little bit of a difference in language. Once again, not criticizing this video, it's a really good video, but just in general, these are terms that you won't hear me use. I don't need sun protection. I don't need protection from the sun, because the sun is out there as a life giver. It's not out there as a malignant force.
Since UV radiation is the main risk factor for melanoma, having more melanin in your skin gives better protection against UV damage. And that's why we see such low incidence rates of melanoma in black people.
So just to be clear, having a lack of melanin is a mutation that exposes you to lots of different harm from the sun and from other things, okay? It's not a case of melanin was developed as a protection. Melanin is the default. That's what I really need to stress. Melanin is the default. Lack of melanin is a mutation that causes you to be vulnerable.
But melanomas do happen in black people. They just tend to happen less often and on parts of the body that don't get as much sun, like the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. This is known as acral melanoma. Scientists still aren't sure of the underlying causes for this type of melanoma, but from the little research that has been done specifically on black patient populations, there doesn't appear to be a connection between acral melanoma and UV exposure.
Now, just to be clear here, it doesn't even say that there doesn't appear to be a connection. Let's read this correctly. This report's been put out by the Association of UV Index Latitude and Melanoma Incidence in Non-White Populations. And here what it says here, I'm going to read this entire set of paragraphs. It says a higher mean UV index was significantly associated with an increase in melanoma incidence only in non-Hispanic whites. So basically, more UV or a higher UV index, we've seen that you've absorbed more UV, therefore you're more likely to get melanoma in whites, although a non-significant association was noted in Native Americans. Now listen to this. Negative but not significant correlations with incidence were observed in blacks. So be very, very cognizant of what this is telling you. It's not just telling you that when they found blacks with melanoma, they didn't have a high UV index. It's actually saying there's a negative correlation. So when they had a low UV index, i.e. when they weren't getting enough sun, there was a correlation but not significant. So they found a correlation between not getting enough UV and having acral melanoma. So it's really important to note that difference. So people out there putting sunscreen on, you could be doing the exact opposite of what is required for black people to actually not develop skin cancer or melanoma.
To be perfectly clear, UV radiation does affect black people. It can cause sunburns, DNA damage, wrinkling of the skin, and freckling. But the sun is about 8 times...
I'm just going to say, I don't really think I've seen any black person suffer from wrinkling of the skin or freckling from sun exposure. In fact, the majority of black people will tell you this. When you're suffering from hyperpigmentation, the sun is actually your best cure. When you've got any kind of skin defects, as a melanated person, you get out in the sun and the sun will normally cure those defects. So once again, a little bit of assumption there. Feel free to obviously correct me in the comments if you feel that I'm being too presumptuous, but this has always been my interpretation.
Less damaging to black people than white people, and only 1 in 10 black people get a sunburn every year. So sunscreen does have benefits, but it probably isn't going to decrease melanoma for most black individuals. And this...
So get that soundbite. Please get that soundbite. Don't skip over that. Sunscreen has its benefits for white people. It is probably not going to decrease melanoma in black people. So why are you wearing it? Why are they advertising it to us?
Is where the problem lies. Public health organizations and healthcare providers are telling the same message to everyone, including black people and other people of color. That message is very specific. Wear sunscreen to prevent melanoma. Here's why that's problematic. For a lot of black people, sunscreen is just an unnecessary expense. Why spend money on something when sunburns are infrequent and the product doesn't protect them from melanoma? Second, public health messaging to black people is dishonest again. Black communities...
I mean, I found that advert just then hilarious. Wear a wide brim hat to protect you from the sun. Once again, I do not need sun protection. I actually remember when my daughter was in primary school and they sent a letter home saying the kids need to all come in with wide brim hats and also with some kind of SPF protection cream in their bag. And I just simply said, no. She's not only not going to wear any SPF, she's not going to wear a hat. She doesn't need protecting from the sun. My child is black. She's melanated. Okay, she's adapted for the sun. Do you think the UK's little bit of sun that we get in the summer is going to affect her, where she's going to develop some kind of disease? It's not going to happen. Stop trying to project your weaknesses, all due respect, onto my children. Okay, this is a defect for you. We have our own concerns. Okay, we're not going to start giving you global sickle cell directives. Okay, so you don't get to give us global skin cancer and melanoma directives. Okay.
Already have much lower trust in the healthcare industry after centuries of mistreatment towards them. Yet, here we are, perpetuating these harmful patterns. To put this into perspective, recognize that we don't tell cis men to regularly check for breast cancer. So, why are we telling black individuals to spend money in order to protect themselves from melanoma? The incidence rates for these two conditions in these populations is almost the same, yet our public health messaging is very different. Third, we're not communicating the important information.
So just to be clear there, you notice that there was like 130 times more likely as a woman to develop breast cancer than a man, and yet we don't get any messaging around men needing to protect from breast cancer and to check for lumps and do all the things that we expect women to do. We don't have all of the screening available for men like we do for women, because we basically acknowledge that the incidence rate is so low, it's not significant enough for the population to make that kind of investment. But when it comes to black people, first of all, developing any kind of melanoma, it's so rare. In fact, I could show you a report. In this report, which I've just popped up on the screen, this table shows the melanoma incidence and mortality in 2020, okay, by world. All right, now let me pick a region. So let's pick Western Africa. So over here we have West Africa, and we have a total of 955 cases. So let's round up and say 1,000 cases, and that's all types of melanoma. So these will likely all be cases of acral melanoma. Probably don't have any kind of UV-induced melanoma there. Now let's contrast that with Western Europe, 65,000 cases, okay? So half the population, 65,000 cases. So let's double that to get an equivalent. That's 130 times more likely to develop melanoma as a white Western European than you are as a black West African. 130 times. And that one time in 130 that a black person does get melanoma, it's not even UV-induced melanoma. So what is this report telling us? It's telling us that Melanoma in black communities is so rare, it's probably not worth the investment or not worth having any kind of these pushes. But secondly, even when we develop it, the cures that you're pushing, the sunscreen, the SPF is totally irrelevant because black people are not getting UV-induced melanoma. Let me repeat, black people are not getting UV-induced melanoma. This is a myth. So they're pushing to us that we need to work on our myths, but the reality is you're pushing a myth. You're pushing this myth that the sun is out there damaging black people, and the data doesn't support it. We've got a very clear report here proving that white people in Western Europe are 130 times more likely to develop any type of melanoma, and of the one that black people do get, it tends to be acral melanoma. So asking black people to put SPF on their skin for perhaps maybe the 2 people in Africa annually who might develop actual UV-induced melanoma, although I still have yet to see the proof of that, is ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid. And the fact that you've got the media out there pushing out there's lies and then there's just the opposite of the truth. This is almost like, it gives me the same vibes that I get when you're talking about ancient Egypt and you get people taking someone who's absolutely black and then presenting them as a white person, like a reconstruction of King Tutankhamun. This gives me those kind of vibes. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, this doesn't happen. We don't get it. And yet you're wasting all of your media energy to tell black people they need to be putting SPF on when it's your people that are dying. Like, you're so willing to put misinformation out there that you're probably happier to see hundreds of thousands of your people dying from melanoma than just to tell the truth and say, actually, we shouldn't be wasting our energy trying to sell this to black people. Do you understand the lunacy of this? It's crazy.
Information that black individuals do need to know about melanoma, namely, that they need to be looking for melanoma in locations that are not sun exposed. And as a result, black people may not know how to identify the melanoma that they're most likely to get, even if those prevalence rates are low. The one-size-fits-all communication strategy around melanoma is leading black people to being underinformed about their health. And this lack of awareness about melanoma and the well-known barriers to healthcare resources black communities regularly face are almost certainly the reason why black people often are diagnosed with later stage melanoma compared to white people, not because black people are not wearing sunscreen. The fourth reason why our current messaging around melanoma to black people is problematic has to do with the safety of sunscreen. In recent years, researchers have discovered that the chemicals found in chemical-based sunscreen are being absorbed into people's bodies more than we previously thought. In 2019, in response to these findings, the FDA decided that chemical sunscreens haven't been tested enough to determine whether they're actually safe.
So when you hear things like something's not been tested enough to identify if it's safe, then you should be assuming that it's not safe. And if you even just have a look at this list of ingredients that's inside chemical sunscreens, you can't even pronounce this stuff. What's really interesting is if you go to Africa, Africans have always had a very understanding relationship when it came to the sun. They don't sunbathe. This is not an African behavior to lie out in the sun in the hope of catching a tan. The sun is something that we understand is incredibly powerful with life-giving force, but also something that its power should not be taken for granted. You also find indigenous forms of sun protection for populations that do spend a long time in the sun. This can be found amongst the Tema tribe of Ethiopia, where they have that red ochre concoction that they put in on their skin. It's found amongst the Himba as well, where they will protect themselves from the sun, or they will find ways of shielding themselves so they don't get too much sun exposure, because yes, sunstroke is a real thing. Yes, if you are overly exposed to the sun, that's unimaginable amounts of heat, and it can be very damaging. Just like you can drown in water, you most certainly can die of dehydration or sunstroke in the sun. The indigenous forms of protection that were created were not created because people in Africa were getting skin cancer. It was not created because people were developing melanoma. Yep, UV-induced melanoma in the African continent amongst African or equatorially evolved people is not a thing. It's entirely a myth. Lack of melanin deficiency is a mutation in the human genome, and it's a recent mutation in the human genome, and it's one of the reasons why melanin deficient people are restricted to the north of the world, because they need that reduced amount of sunlight, because if they were exposed to equatorial conditions, they literally could not survive. These are facts. They're not just things that are made up. These are historical facts. SPFs contain a whole load of things that you shouldn't be putting on your skin. It's poisonous. Let's just put this all together. Black people don't get UV-induced melanoma. Black people do get acromelanoma, which has a positive correlation with lack of UV, okay, as we saw from the other report. We also know that SPF creams, okay, these sun protection formulations, contain chemicals that basically the FDA are saying we don't know are safe yet. So you could say are chemically unsafe. What do you think that concoction sounds like? If you put that all together, these ridiculous black people telling you need to be using SPF, and yet our form of skin cancer results from not having enough UV, and you compound that with the fact that you're putting these kind of chemicals on your skin, what do you think the outcome is going to be? I would say it's more likely we're going to get a rise in acromelanoma as a result of people utilizing SPF and listening to the bizarre information and the bizarre advice that they're being given by the professionals.
After failing to encourage sunscreen manufacturers to run their own safety studies, the FDA conducted 2 studies of their own. In both of these randomized clinical trials, the FDA found blood levels of the sunscreen chemicals exceeded the original safe threshold almost immediately. The takeaway here isn't that chemical sunscreen.
Just to be clear, what is stressed there is that the chemicals from these SPF formulations are being absorbed into the blood, and they're being absorbed into your bloodstream. This should be incredibly concerning, and yet it's almost with the same stupidity that people were promoting the you-know-what a few years ago, that they're going to be promoting SPF without listening to the clear medical reports talking about how harmful. Is it worth the trade-off? Is the entire population of black people putting SPF a worthwhile trade-off for the maybe under 10 black people globally who die from actual UV-induced melanoma? If that's even a thing. If that's even a thing, I could be making it up. We don't know that, because every single example of melanoma you're going to see in melanated people just happens to be acromelanoma. I can't find the case. I have yet to find the case of UV-induced melanoma in melanated people.
Sunscreen is not safe. We just don't know if it is safe. That then begs the question, why are we telling a portion of the population who don't need to wear sunscreen to wear it anyways, when we're not sure if it's safe? I would argue we shouldn't be. To summarize, public health organizations are telling black people that they should wear sunscreen to prevent melanoma, even though there isn't evidence to support that message. As a result, black people not only are being given information that's not useful to them, but they're also not being told about the information that they do need to know, that they can get melanoma, but it often looks different than in white people, and it appears in places that aren't typically exposed to the sun.
So what an excellent summary, and I really do commend this person for being willing to tell the truth about this subject, because so many medical doctors, professionals out there, even in the black community, are unwilling to do this. They're gripped by some kind of fear or a need to be included or a need to not offend people. Oh, I hope my blackness doesn't offend you, or I hope my melanin doesn't offend you. It's like, stop being ridiculous. Say it with your chest. I don't need sunscreen. Sorry, I'm not putting that on. And I really do commend this, because 600 views on this video, that's criminal. How has this video got 600 views and it's been out for 2 years, and yet videos about two laughing jackal hyena women who start their grubby little salon talking about, make sure you take our products, make sure you put hyaluronic serum on your skin. These ridiculous women are getting hundreds of thousands, and there'll probably be millions of views over the next couple of years, and they're telling absolute lies. It's just, the mind boggles.
Before we end this video, I think it's appropriate that we summarize how to identify melanoma in Black individuals. First, like we've mentioned a few times already, melanomas are most likely to appear in places that don't get much sun. This includes the palms of the hands, the soles of the feet, around the anus and genitals, the lower legs, under the nails, or in the mouth.
So places that don't get sun is where, I need to stress this, it's where Black people get melanoma. Places that don't get sun. And as you saw once again from the other report, there's a correlation, not significant, but there is a correlation that suggests that lack of UV increases the rates of acral melanoma in Black people. Lack of UV, i.e. not getting enough sunlight. Please get the message here.
Unlike white people who have to look for patches of their skin that look like freckles or moles, Black people need to compare the spot in question to their surrounding skin. Look for spots on the skin that are darker than the surrounding skin. The spots may have a different texture and can feel rough and dry to the touch. Also look to see if the spots are growing in size, bleeding, or seem to heal very slowly after injury. Any of these symptoms may indicate that the spot is melanoma. A great way to measure growth is to take a picture of the spot while measuring it with a ruler. Every month, refer back to the picture to see if that spot has grown. And if you're not sure if a spot might be melanoma, go see your healthcare provider.
And I just wanted to give that video the respect of actually playing it through to the end, because it's so informative. And actually, whilst I sit here and I rant and I get angry, as you probably get used to me doing now, actually this subject really does annoy me. He gives really good information. So let's have a look at a few reports and the kind of data that we can get from them to see what the truths and what the untruths are, and be able to kind of sort and sift through some of this information. First of all, the thing that we have to understand is cutaneous melanoma is the name or the term given to the entire group of melanomas together. So together they're called cutaneous melanoma.
This information was taken from the AIM at Melanoma Foundation. What is cutaneous melanoma? Cutaneous or skin melanoma, also called malignant melanoma, although any diagnosis of melanoma is cancer even if malignant is not used, develops in pigment cells called melanocytes. These melanocytes produce melanin, the vital pigment that gives our skin its color and protects it from damage caused by ultraviolet, UV rays from the sun or tanning devices. Cutaneous melanoma occurs when cancerous cells grow out of control, mutate, and crowd out normal cells. Usually, cutaneous melanoma begins in the epidermis, the top layer of skin, and can become invasive from there. There are 4 main subtypes of cutaneous melanoma: superficial spreading melanoma, nodular melanoma, lentigo maligna melanoma, and acral lentiginous melanoma, ALM.
The data suggests that only the last type, acral lentiginous melanoma, is the one that occurs in melanated communities. The other 3 types tend to be UV induced and tend to be so rare that you almost would say that they're non-occurrent in melanated communities.
What is acral lentiginous melanoma? Acral lentiginous melanoma, ALM, is a specific type of melanoma that appears on the palms of the hands, the soles of the feet, or under the nails. The word acral means extremity in Greek and refers to the occurrence of this type of melanoma on the extremities, hands and feet. The word lentiginous refers to the fact that the spot of melanoma is often much darker than the surrounding skin. Though relatively uncommon in the general population, ALM is the most common type of melanoma in people with darker skin and those of Asian descent. However, it can appear on all skin types.
So it's really important to note here that it's relatively uncommon in the general population. That's all people. It's most common for people who are dark-skinned and Asian, i.e. Africans and Asians. It's most common in us because we just don't get the other types. But it's still incredibly rare, regardless. So regardless, we're not getting acral melanoma more often. We're just getting it at a higher rate within our populations because we don't get in comparison to the other types of melanoma. So that's all it is.
This information was reported in the National Library of Medicine in a report titled Acral Lentiginous Melanoma, written by Kelly Hall. Acral lentiginous melanoma is a subtype of cutaneous malignant melanoma. It is comprised of malignant melanocytes, which can become invasive with time. It is often diagnosed at a later stage than the other forms of cutaneous malignant melanoma, and in populations that are at a low risk for UV-induced melanomas, which highlights the need for early screening and detection. It is the least common subtype of melanoma, comprising only 2 to 3% of total melanoma diagnoses. Unlike other cutaneous malignant melanoma, UV radiation is not thought to play a significant part in the development of ALM. It is most commonly on the lower extremities and is often advanced at the time of presentation, leading to a high level of morbidity and mortality. Incidence rates of ALM were highest in Hispanic whites at 2.5 per 1 million person years and significantly lower in blacks, non-Hispanic whites, and Asian Pacific Islanders at 1.8, 1.8, and 1.1 per 1 million person years respectively. Melanoma-specific survival, MSS, was lower in black and Hispanic white populations at 5 and 10 years than whites. However, when controlled for Breslow depth, no difference was seen. This is thought to be attributable to the advanced stage at presentation in these minority groups.
It's really important to know the only reason that it's actually more fatal for melanated people is because it tends to get tracked later, and that's because they don't know what to look for. Most people would see a spot on their hand or a spot on the bottom of their foot. They wouldn't instantly think, oh, I have a form of skin cancer. So that's the reason why. It's not because it's any more dangerous, it's just that people aren't really looking out for it.
The following information was published by the Melanoma Research Alliance. Acral melanoma, sometimes called acral lentiginous melanoma, is a rare subtype of melanoma that forms on the palms, soles of feet, or under finger or toenails. Unlike cutaneous skin melanoma, it is not believed to be caused by sun exposure and therefore occurs in areas not typically exposed to the sun. Acral melanoma affects people of all races and ethnicities.
Okay, so the very thing that they're selling you is not going to help with ALM. Now finally, let's just have a look at some charts that are going to give us some data regarding actual rates of melanoma in melanated populations. This graphic showing the rates in relation to populations around the world. So first of all, you see more than 20 per 100,000. You can see Australia and New Zealand. Now, what do we have in Australia and New Zealand? Well, we're talking about the southern hemisphere. We're talking about probably high exposure to sunlight and UV, and we're talking about populations that shouldn't be there. You know, let's be frank. We're talking about, you know, populations that have colonized, that come from Northern Europe, and they shouldn't be there. So as a result, you have massively high amounts of melanoma in these populations because simply they're in a climate where they haven't evolved. The indigenous people of Melanesia, the indigenous people of Australasia were dark-skinned people. They were black people, and hence you have this massive amount of melanoma. What's interesting is as well is you also have it in Northern Europe, and most people will find that surprising. But actually you get, even though you get very, very long dark periods in this part of the world, you also get very high exposure to UV, where people are getting these massively high rates of melanoma, which is somewhat bizarre. Now, if you move down to the populations of Africa, less than 1% per 100,000. Remember, bear in mind, this is cutaneous melanoma, so this is the entire group. This includes the acral melanoma. Less than 1 per 100,000. Let's watch a couple of videos and just get a feel for the kind of things that are being put out to the general public about this topic.
Nearly 100,000 Americans are diagnosed with melanoma every year in the U.S. That's the most serious type of skin cancer. A recent study shows that men are more vulnerable than women, and black men.
Now, I just want you to notice already at this stage, notice how every image that they're showing, they're doing a piece about melanoma, okay? Not about, they're literally doing this piece specifically about melanoma, and they've only shown black people here. They're not even trying to make it equal, like say, okay, let's have a range and maybe one of the people is black. This is literally targeting the black community with this.
Are at the highest risk. In tonight's Health Watch, CBS's Errol Barnett explains the disparity in survival rates.
Now, this is very clever what he said there, the disparity in survival rates. Survival rates need to be given alongside rates of contraction, because survival rates without rates of contraction is not telling you the full picture. If 3 black people contract skin cancer and 2 of them die, that's a survival rate of 33%. That's quite low, I agree. But that's also 2 people have died from this. Now, if in comparison to that, 1,000 white people have contracted it and half of them die, then that's a massive difference in survival rates. We've got black people only have survivability of 33%, white people have survivability of 50%, but 500 white people have died as opposed to 2 black people have died. So you don't advertise or you don't lead your discussion with survival rates, okay? You lead it as how big of this is this a risk to me as a human being. As a black person, it is a minuscule risk because it's so small, the likelihood you're going to contract it. As a white person, you might have better survivability, but the risk is huge to you because there's a massive chance that you're going to contract it. Let's carry on.
Now, you think that you're invincible. This is something that has never crossed my mind.
Josh Paschal was a sophomore on the University of Kentucky's football team when he discovered a strange mark on the bottom of his foot.
Now, you think you're invincible. You hear those words straight away. It's kind of like there to chip away at the self-confidence of the black person. Oh, you think your melanin's so good, but look what happened to me. And it's interesting. They've already started talking about the fact that his mark is found on the bottom of his foot. It's really important you note that, because even on a short segment like this, the contradictions are massive.
How small was it?
If you put a dot of a pin on your foot, it was about that size.
That dot turned out to be a rare form of melanoma, the deadliest type of skin cancer. Paschal needed multiple surgeries and immunotherapy to remove it.
It was like learning how to play football again. You had a big scar on your foot. It hit me hard mentally.
Men are more likely to die of melanoma than women, and black men are 26% more likely to die of this form of skin cancer than white men, even though they make up fewer cases.
No. Did you hear that? So that statistic was very, 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 very telling. So first of all, they talk about the fact that obviously men contract it more than women. But secondly, it's talking about a specific type of melanoma. And this is what they're deliberately hiding from you. They say, okay, well, 26% black men are 26% more likely to contract this kind of melanoma. But this news piece doesn't touch on the kind of melanoma. It just says melanoma in general. So you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, it's just general skin cancer. This is acral melanoma. You can see it appeared on the bottom of his foot. Acral melanoma is not UV induced. I will repeat, acral melanoma, which we get in the black community and the Asian community, is not UV induced. It is astronomically rare form of cancer, and yet they are putting it under the banner of melanoma, which they contract at a much higher rate, and saying, well, you know, this type of melanoma, black men are 26% more likely to die from it. This is misinformation at its highest.
Unfortunately, Black Americans oftentimes are less likely to carry private insurance. They're less likely to be able to have access to quality healthcare in their neighborhoods and in their communities.
If detected...
Now, everything that he just said was correct. So I'm not going to criticize that doctor. Everything that he just said is correct and very, very valid. One of the big problems is that it's hard to diagnose this form of cancer early because we're not informed about it. We're not informed about what to look out for. And also, even when we are informed about it, you're much less likely to have the kind of coverage in America. In the UK, we have the NHS, but in America, the kind of coverage that's going to make sure that you're equipped and you're able to look after yourself and you're covered if the worst did happen. That's all very valid. But notice they didn't allow him, I'm sure he's aware, to go into details about the kind of melanoma that's contracted in the black community, which is completely different to the kind of melanoma that's contracted by those who are melanin deficient.
Early, the 5-year survival rate for melanoma is 99%.
So now they've gone back to talking about general melanoma. Okay, so now we're talking about all forms of melanoma. And by the way, there are 5 different forms of melanoma. They're talking about all of them here. But specifically when they're talking about black people, they're talking about the rarest form of melanoma. And the amount of people that it affects is very, very small.
But it plummets to 32% once melanoma has spread to the body's organs.
Black people are not immune to melanoma. It's time that we're more aware that this is a silent killer within our communities.
To protect your...
And that's very true. We're not immune to melanoma, but I'm not going to say immune, we are nearly immune to the form that white people get. That's the UV-induced form. That's the sun damaging your cells, resulting in you getting melanoma from where you've been sun exposed. That we are almost immune to that. It's so rare. It's absolutely so rare in the black community. It's almost unheard of for people to get UV-induced melanoma, and they're not touching on that in this article, and that's very, very worrying.
Protect yourself, use sunscreen with an SPF of 30 or higher and reapply every 2 hours.
So here we go, and we're touching on here what I spoke about earlier, about the fact that when it comes to their problems, when it comes to white issues, the problem is generalized. We need to reapply sunscreen every 2 hours. We need to protect ourselves from the sun because we get UV-induced skin cancer. So you all do it. You do it, black people, even though it's got nothing to do with the guy getting melanoma on the bottom of his foot like you just saw.
Ask for help with hard-to-reach places like your back and get your skin checked by a board-certified dermatologist at least once a year. Pascal is now playing a different type of defense with the Detroit Lions.
So, would SPF have helped with melanoma at the bottom of his foot? Can someone tell me, do people put SPF on the bottom of their feet and the palms of their hands and inside their armpits, which is places where you get acromelanoma because you get it as a result of not having adequate sun exposure in certain parts of your body?
See anything that's abnormal, get that checked out.
Errol Barnett.
I mean, and that's good advice that he gave. You see anything abnormal, get that checked out. But what's happened here is this channel, CBS, has used this to its advantage to deceive the black community, to place white people on a tier of superiority where they believe that black people are more at risk of skin cancer. This is deliberate misinformation. And to push out their product. Let's not undermine how much of a massive industry the SPF industry is. The sun protection formula industry is humongous, and they've managed to achieve so many things by putting out this misinformation. So at this point, I think it'll be a good time for us to have a look at another one of these propaganda videos. So let's just have a look at the title there: Skin Cancer and the Black Community. 2 nurses and sisters on a mission to save lives. Let's see how this pans out.
In the black community, they're sharing their top tips for staying safe and their #1 piece of advice.
And I mean, I know I shouldn't pause it here, but just look at the... I don't know, I read a lot into things like body language, and there's such a degree of uncertainty, but also smugness in this guy. I know I'm reading too much into this, but I don't know, man. Let's listen.
Take a look.
I always say your skin will tell your sins.
With summer just 2 days away, registered nurses Carla Nelson and Wendy Jules of Fleur de Lis Med Spa are ramping up efforts to spread an important message about sun safety.
So let's be clear about who they're a pair of nurses. These aren't medical experts, okay? These are a pair of nurses who have started their own skincare business. So there's a conflict of interest there already straight away. Without being too critical, they're trying to sell their products, aren't they?
People should be wearing sunscreen every single day. And we like to tell people, reapply.
Our little hashtag is reapply till you die.
Now, I promised I wasn't going to be too cynical, so I'm not going to be... I'm not going to lie, I find it very, very frustrating. Because, to be honest with you, I kind of expect it from the medical establishment, from Europeans to be dishonest about our health. It's been a part of establishing dominance over the melanated community. So I get it and I expect it when they lie about us. But I find it incredibly jarring and incredibly frustrating when it's actually members of our community who are peddling this, and it can be peddled for many different reasons. It can be ignorance, it can be selfishness, we can't put that aside, and sometimes it can just be outright stupidity. But what I find really irritating is that there's such a willingness and they're so fast to want to diminish and demean and to bring wherever black people are up somewhere, let's bring them down. The fastest way to establish yourself, to get ahead, is to actually make a decision that you're going to sell out the black community. Because actually that always pays off. You want to make a movie demeaning the black community, I guarantee you're going to get funding. You want to be a famous singer, or rapper, demean the black community. Say derogatory things, and it's an easy path ahead. You want your medical business to blow up? Well, tell black people that they're the highest at risk of getting skin cancer. Tell these establishment owners the things that they want to hear. Let them hear the sounds and noises that they want to hear, and that's how you get ahead. So these two women here, I find infuriating. I can't lie, and I'd love to sit here and be dishonest on my channel and be politically correct, but I can't. I find them infuriating because to me they are worse criminals than the execs on the channel who are even pushing this lie to begin with.
You want to tell people to reapply your sunscreen at least every 2 hours, especially in the summer.
And the reason why I find it so frustrating is because they're giving out that advice. I'm not gonna lie, it didn't take me a year to research to do this video. It didn't take me a year of research. It took me, a few hours, if I'm gonna be totally honest with you. And how much time have they even bothered to research whether or not, do they know the difference between acral melanoma, cutaneous melanoma? Do they know the difference between the rates of contraction of skin cancer? There comes a point where you can't use ignorance as an excuse. There comes a point where you have to stop being naive.
And they're determined to debunk this prevalent myth within the black community.
Black doesn't crack.
Debunk this prevalent myth in the black community. Black doesn't crack. So I want you to fathom this. Debunk this prevalent myth in the black community. So now black doesn't crack is a myth. Now the fact that melanin protects you, well, I'm not even going to say protects you. The fact that melanin proves that you're adapted for sunlight. Because I'm going to stop using words like protect, because the sun is not out here trying to kill us. I don't believe that. That's more of their language being democratized and being socialized into us. I'm not going to use that language. So I don't even say that melanin protects us. Melanin simply proves that we are adapted for sunlight. So these things, the fact that, melanated skin is thicker, melanated skin is more resilient, melanated skin stays youthful for longer. All of these things, you're going to now debunk that myth. We're determined to. It's not a myth. Okay, it's not a myth. You don't have to diminish all of our strengths. You don't have to throw all of our advantages to the pigs just because you're getting a crummy little paycheck. How dare you say that you're gonna debunk the myth that black doesn't crack? How dare you? This is just really insulting. And anyway, let me play on because.
And it does. There's a myth where we don't need to wear sunscreen. We don't have to hydrate our skin in such a way where we have a natural protection from the sun.
So did you see the conflation there? There's a myth that we don't have to wear sunscreen, we don't have to hydrate our skin, we have a natural protection from the sun. I'm sorry, we don't need to wear sunscreen. We probably do need to hydrate our skin because everybody needs to hydrate their skin. And we do have natural protection from the sun. Those aren't myths. Those are facts. Those are hard facts. Those are facts backed by statistics, facts backed by science. These are things that you are never going to be able to diminish. How dare you call it a myth? How dare you lie to our community and lie to our children to sell your crummy little products?
Sun. And that's not always the case because we are also, as a people of color, prone to skin cancers, prone to melanomas, prone to so many other diagnoses sun-related if we're not.
So what other diagnoses is sun-related? What are these list of things that we're prone to? Prone to skin cancers? No, there's no evidence that we get any UV-induced skin cancers. We do get melanoma, but it's not UV-induced. It's a completely different type, probably linked to your crummy little products. But what's this other list of things that black people are prone to? Is this what you sell to people to hook people into buying your product or to come into your clinic or to signing up to one of your greasy little subscriptions? It's disgusting.
Not protecting our skin.
According to the American Cancer Society, the estimated 5-year melanoma survival rate for black patients is only 70% versus 94% for white patients.
Oh my God, it's only 70%, and whereas it's 94% for white patients. Remember what I said earlier? I said the fact that if 4 black people contract melanoma and acral melanoma at that, and one of them dies, then that's where you can get your 70%. I know it's 75%, but you get the idea, okay? That's where you can get your 70% from. However, if 1,000, like I said before, white people contract it, okay, and 60 of them die and 940 of them survive, that's where you can get a 94%. But at the end of that, white people will still be 60 times more likely than black people will. You have to report the truth. I'll give an example. Imagine in America, 2 black people get struck by lightning in a year and they both die. And then 6 white people get struck by lightning and 2 of them survive and 4 of them die. All of a sudden now, we're like, black people, you're more at risk from dying from being struck by lightning. You need to now all walk around in rubber-soled shoes and make sure that you're wearing your lightning conductivity pants, because if lightning strikes you, you're definitely gonna die. There's a 100% kill rate. Do you realize how stupid that line of argument is? But that's literally what they're pushing here. That's the level of stupidity of the argument they're pushing. Black people are not at risk. I repeat, black people are not at risk of UV-induced skin cancer.
And in addition to wearing sunscreen, Carla and Wendy say staying hydrated is also important.
And switching your cleansers to something more lightweight, and also adding serums like hyaluronic serum, vitamin C, and also drinking lots of water, eating fruits like watermelon, things that are just going to hydrate you also on the inside.
I mean, I'm not going to say that the bottom 2 pieces of advice ain't bad. Lots of water, eat fruits like watermelon. Yep, that's great. And then add serums, hydrate. So here's where they're pushing all of their crummy little products. Maybe I'm being ignorant here, but I'm an African. I was in Nigeria just a couple of months ago, and I don't think there's a massive serum and hyaluronic serum market there. I don't think anyone, if I say I don't think, I know for a fact nobody uses SPFs on their skin, and yet we have an entire nation where UV-induced melanoma is virtually 0%. Make that make sense in the context of what you're trying to push here. This is just you, once again, tacking on to mainstream white narrative in the hope that they're going to back your business. It's selfish and it's disgusting.
We want to do dual action, inside and outside.
The dynamic duo's working relationship is supplemented by the fact that they're also sisters who share big dreams.
I'm sorry, crummy little salon. Back black businesses, this, that, and the other. No, I'm sorry, they've made their bed now. They're going to lie in it. I will never back them. If you're going to lie about the black community, if you're going to diminish us and demean us, and if you're going to claim that our natural skin, our God-given skin is not good enough, that the things that God gave us are not sufficient, we need to add your crummy little products, otherwise we're all going to die, we're all at risk of dying. You're going to sell that lie to our children, and you think I'm going to back your crummy little salon.
I would say I'm the dreamer and my sister's the executor.
Yeah.
That's our dynamic, and it's been working well.
She dreams a lot. So I'm always working.
One of those dreams was to open a luxury medical spa where people of color could come and learn about how to care for their skin.
It's not a medical spa, okay? Let's make that very, very clear. You don't own a medical spa. Yeah, you own a product placement salon. You're in the industry of human pampering. You're not in the industry of black medicine. You are not. Maybe with these hydration therapy and selling the watermelon, maybe that part of it I could classify as being medical and I can give you thumbs up for, but pushing people to use your hyaluronic serums and your SPFs that you want them to apply every 2 hours so they can come and get a re-up every week from you, nah, miss me.
We both worked in fields of dermatology and plastic surgery, and because we felt like there was a lack of representation, we wanted to start our own lane.
In our own neighborhood.
In our own neighborhood where we grew up.
So you saw a gap in the market to push white products on black people. Spot on.
The community they've cultivated is growing by the day.
It's full-blown sisterhood. We go from hey girl hey to hey girl hey.
And that's what you call exploitative there. Okay, this is what you got, exploiting black culture, exploiting the trust and the love that we have to support one another's business ambitions. You're going to exploit that, and you're going to push a lie, push a narrative, and not realize how harmful it is. And what really bothers me about people like this is they're here for all the lies, they're here for all the misinformation, but when it turns on its head, and actually, let's say down the line, a few of their customers actually do contract acral melanoma as a result of perhaps their products or some kind of related cancerous disease as a result of having these chemicals that they shouldn't have on their skin. I guarantee you they will not be here to put their hand up for blame. Just like those people who were pushing people in the black community to take the you-know-what that the government was issuing. And when a whole wave of melanated people died, those same people who were pushing it, they weren't there repenting it. They weren't there saying, I'm really sorry for promoting this. All those black celebrities who were turning around trying to encourage us to take that poison and to inject it into our veins, they all of a sudden disappeared. And that's exactly what these women will do. They will disappear when the time is right. So that's why, me personally, I have not got time for this, and I haven't got time for them. They're exploiting the good nature of the melanated community, and I find it disgusting.
So it's lovely to see our clients smile.
All right, so they say black does crack, so reapply.
That's not funny. They say black does crack. I mean, all due respect, look at the white, and I'm not just singling him out, but he's over the moon. It's so great to hear it. Wait, I didn't say it, you said it. Black does crack. Yeah, I knew it. I told you guys, there's nothing superior about your skin. Your skin is actually worse than ours. That's what they're thinking. So you're sitting there laughing like a bunch of clapping clowns, and he's just sitting there feeling and looking superior because you've all been willing to diminish yourself and to take a very obvious advantage, something that he's been aware of since the day that he was born. He's been aware that these people have superior skin to me. These people are more well adapted to this environment to me, and you're willing to sell that birthright down the line, sell that birthright down the water and just diminish yourselves for the sake of selling some products and for the sake of getting the thumbs up from your executives. There is little to no evidence that black people and melanated people can get UV-induced skin cancer or UV-induced melanoma. There's almost zero evidence. 2, that black people do get melanoma, but it's not UV-induced. It tends to be a strand of melanoma called acral melanoma. 3, acral melanoma has a positive correlation with not getting enough sunlight. So it's the exact opposite, and that was proven by a medical report I showed earlier. So whereas white people with melanoma were found to have higher exposure to UV, black people with melanoma were found to have negative rates to UV, i.e. not getting enough UV. 4, black people and melanated people should not be using sunscreen. Firstly, because it serves no benefit. Secondly, because it does not help in cases and will probably enhance cases of acral melanoma due to the negative relationship with direct UV sunlight. And because it's been proven to contain chemicals that are not only absorbed into the skin, but have not been passed as safe by the FDA. So basically things that are chemically unsafe. So there are a plethora of reasons why you should not be putting SPF on your skin, and actually why you shouldn't be protecting from the sun at all. Sun protection is not a melanated thing. Black doesn't crack. That isn't a myth. That isn't something that we put out there. That isn't something that we created to make ourselves feel good. Melanin is a real thing. Melanin is proof that we adapted along the equator. It's proof that our skin is adapted for the absorption of minerals and vitamins directly from sunlight, and there is no proof that the sun, that luminary in the sky that has been there for since mankind obviously was created, has any malignant effects on the body of melanated people. So enjoy your sunlight, be aware of the heat of the sun, and be aware that you need to keep yourself hydrated. But aside from that, enjoy sunlight and know that you have been adapted to be able to absorb sunlight, and that there is no evidence suggesting that black or Asian people can contract UV-induced melanoma.